Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon in Europe, and good evening all around the world and into Korea. I'm Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, and it's my honor to welcome you to the 2021 Atlantic Council Korea Foundation Forum. First of all, it's a pleasure to bring this year's forum to you from the Atlantic Council's new studio space. It is wonderful once again to host our remarkable delegation from the Republic of Korea and other distinguished speakers in person at our headquarters today. The one thing we learned through this period of time of COVID is that we could reach exponentially larger audiences through our events, but at the same time, there's nothing quite like in-person engagement that we have also here in the office, so hybrid is the future. We're delighted to host this annual event with the Korea Foundation under the leadership of Dr. Gunn Lee. Dr. Lee, we're grateful to continue our important partnership with the Korea Foundation under your leadership at a time when the US-ROK alliance and economic partnership is becoming more important than ever before. I would also like to congratulate the Korea Foundation on its 30th anniversary and for opening a new center for the Korea Foundation USA in Washington. This is a wonderful achievement, and we offer you all our best wishes for the next 30 years. This forum continues to serve as a premier platform for gathering a high-level group of current and former officials and experts from the United States and the Republic of Korea to advance compelling discussions on the most pressing issues facing the US-ROK alliance and economic partnership, not just for bilateral cooperation, but for our role in the broader Indo-Pacific and around the world. In doing so, we produce innovative and actionable solutions for the strategically complex times in which we live. This year's forum comes at an especially important period for the alliance, and one that perhaps will be remembered as an inflection point in the alliance's history. As highlighted in the US-ROK leaders' joint statement in May 2021, the United States and the Republic of Korea have committed to a bold agenda of enhanced and expanded cooperation. And these are the topics we're going to be talking about in this forum, including fostering strong and resilient supply chains, deepening bilateral efforts in outer space and across digital frontiers, and safeguarding a trusted, values-driven digital and technological ecosystem in line with our shared democratic values, because that's, of course, what underscores everything. At the same time, we find ourselves still battling the COVID-19 pandemic, and the alliance is grappling with an enduring North Korean threat. All of this comes as US-China strategic competition continues to develop, which is changing both regional and global security and economic architecture. The set of challenges and opportunities our alliance faces are precisely the reason we have gathered here for the Atlantic Council Korea Foundation Forum. And just the news of the last 24 hours underscores both the challenges and the opportunities. The challenge, of course, we all know the latest news that North Korea fired a short-range missile off its east coast on Tuesday. Just as North Korea's ambassador to the United Nations in New York was calling on the United States to end joint military exercises and withdraw its strategic weapons from around the Korean Peninsula. But then there was another piece of news. It's on the front page of the Wall Street Journal this morning, and that is about a massive new investment, US-South Korean investment. Ford Motor Company planning to build its first new assembly plant in decades, along with 3 battery factories to fortify its push into electric vehicles. And so that's a $7 billion investment on behalf of Ford, but a $4.4 billion investment on behalf of the South Korean company SK, which of course is a cutting-edge battery manufacturer. This is one of the most exciting economic areas of cooperation between the United States and South Korea in a very long time. The set of challenges and opportunities as as signaled by a North Korean missile strike and an incredible investment in Kentucky and Tennessee of SK and Ford, you can see the two ends of what's possible in the relationship in a positive sense, and also what's challenging for the relationship in a security sense. Integrating the voices of our allies and partners to develop actionable policy recommendations and innovative strategies is key to the mission of the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security's Asia Security Initiative led by Dr. Mian Oh. I'd like to remember everyone that today's event is open to the public and on the record. We will be taking audience questions during today's two panel sessions, so please feel free to submit your questions via Zoom's Q&A function or on Twitter using the hashtag ACKF, hashtag ACKF. With that, it is now my honor to introduce Dr. Gunn Lee, President of the Korea Foundation. Before joining the Korea Foundation, Dr. Lee was Professor of International Politics at the Graduate School of International Studies at Seoul National University. And he also headed a think tank, the Korea Institute for Future Strategies, from 2003 to 2007. He is also a current member of the Global Future Council of the World Economic Forum, which he previously chaired. During his career, Dr. Lee has made significant contributions to US-ROK relations through voluminous scholarly writing, especially on Korea's soft power, as well as through regular media commentary and government consultations. Most recently, Dr. Lee spoke at the 2021 KF Mount Halla Forum, where he elaborated on the future of innovation and the search for the new game changers, as well as the need to maintain ethics and empathy in the current landscape of emerging technology. We are very fortunate to be working with Dr. Lee at this critical time, and he is a true asset to the US-ROK Alliance. Dr. Lee, it's my honor to pass the stage to you.
Thank you. The Honorable President Frederick Kemp, the Honorable Ken Moy, former Minister of Foreign Affairs, His Excellency Young-Kwon Yoon, His Excellency Seok-Young Choi, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to the 2021 Atlantic Council Korea Foundation Forum. I am Lee Gun, President of the Korea Foundation. On behalf of the Korea Foundation, it is my great pleasure to stand here as we open our fourth forum here in Washington, D.C. I would like to begin by expressing my sincere gratitude to all of you for your commitment in participating in this event. My special thanks also go to those who traveled from outside of Washington, D.C., especially those who made the long journey from Seoul. I assure you that the trip will be well worth it. The year 2021, the 139th year of diplomatic ties between the U.S. and the Republic of Korea, has been a dramatic one for our alliance. The US-ROK summit on May 21st demonstrated that the alliance has recovered and also served to reaffirm that peace on the Korean Peninsula will be sought through dialogue and engagement, especially with North Korea. During the summit, the two leaders announced the termination of the ROK-US missile guidelines and agreed to establish a comprehensive course global vaccine partnership that combines the advanced technology of the United States with Korea's projection capabilities. Expanding cooperation between the United States and Korea will facilitate economic recovery, not only for our two countries, but for the entire world. In Korea, with interest in climate change increasing like never before, Korea successfully hosted the P4G Seoul Summit, the first multilateral summit on environmental issues to be held within the country. Korea is also pursuing a Green New Deal as one of its most prioritized national projects. President Moon has announced that Korea will serve as a bridge between advanced and developing countries to bolster international solidarity and cooperation in responding to the climate crisis. During the last 3 Atlantic Council Korea Foundation Forum, we have discussed the future of the US-ROK alliance in an international setting. At the first forum, we began with a discussion on finding an economy security nexus between our 2 countries. In 2019, right after the Hanoi summit, we spoke about regional architecture and the future of the US-ROK alliance. And last year, we explored the future of the rules-based international system. This year, the Atlantic Council and the Korea Foundation have designed the forum to meet the utmost interest of the US-ROK alliance. We believe that the May 21st summit has shaped what the US-ROK alliance will be in the coming years. Our 2 leaders announced not only the importance of security and economic cooperation, but also of our partnership in emerging areas such as cooperation in the field of science and technologies, including semiconductors, batteries, space, quantum physics, and 5G and 6G technologies, and our commitment to cooperate in the areas of climate change, immigration, and development aid. The May 21st summit has indeed transformed the US-ROK alliance into a future-oriented global and strategic alliance. Participating experts and government officials will discuss how each issue can be tackled within the government and by private sectors. We hope that the audience will be able to get a firmer grasp on the meaning of each of the announcements made at the May 21st summit, as well as a look at what will come next. After the forum, we will be gratified to see more and more people concerning themselves with the US-ROK alliance and carefully considering how we can work together to enhance our relationship. After all, it is important that the alliance serves to improve both of our countries. It has been quite a while since the Korea Foundation last visited the Atlantic Council. Living in the world under the COVID-19 pandemic and making the trip all the way to Washington, D.C. Was not an easy decision. However, this event is important, and it is about time that we met in person to discuss the current issues faced by both our countries. By tackling these issues here through the forum, as well as backstage, we hope this occasion will serve as a milestone for enhancing the personal relationship between our 2 nations as well. Last but not least, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to President and CEO Frederick Kemp and to all the staff of the Atlantic Council for their hard work to make this forum possible on such short notice. I sincerely hope that this event will provide us with a truly timely platform to share our views on the US-ROK alliance and the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, for those significant opening remarks, and particularly for underscoring the emerging areas that we'll be working on together. And we at the Atlantic Council see our forum as bookends for the important work we can do between each forum on these sets of issues, which are now, as you said, expanded into areas of science and technology and climate and other areas. And as you said, that will make both the United States and the Republic of Korea stronger. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
And with that, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker for today's forum, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, Ken Moy. P-Das Moy was appointed Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs in June 2021. Immediately prior to this appointment, he was Acting Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of Intelligence and Research. He has been a Foreign Service Officer for 29 years. His most recent diplomatic assignment was Chief of Mission of the American Institute in Taiwan. Prior to that, he served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State in the Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs with responsibility for China, Mongolia, and Taiwan. So in other words, Ken Moy knows what he's talking about. It's an honor to have you with us, sir, joining us virtually today. Over to you for your keynote remarks.
Thanks so much, Fred, for that generous introduction. I want to thank the Atlantic Council and the Korea Foundation for extending this very kind invitation to me to speak to all of you today. And I very much look forward to sharing our thoughts with you on the important role of US-ROK relations and our alliance, and the important role it will play in shaping the world of the 21st century. Diplomacy is back at the center of U.S. foreign policy, and we are strengthening our alliances and engagement with the world to meet the challenges of today and tomorrow. President Biden, Vice President Harris, and Secretary Blinken have made that clear in both their words and their actions. Secretaries Blinken and Austin visited Seoul as part of the first overseas cabinet-level travel of the administration. We welcomed President Moon to Washington on May 21st as only the second head of state to visit the White House under this administration. And most recently, Deputy Secretary Sherman traveled to Tokyo to meet trilaterally with ROK First Vice Minister Che and Japanese Vice Foreign Minister Mori, followed by meetings with President Moon, Foreign Minister Chung, and others in Seoul. And I was very privileged to actually join the Deputy Secretary on that travel. And of course, just a few days ago, Secretary Blinken met both bilaterally and trilaterally with Foreign Minister Chung and Japanese Foreign Minister Motegi on the margins of the UN General Assembly. And I was present there along with my colleague, Mark Lambert. We have pursued such robust engagement because the US-ROK alliance is the linchpin of peace, security, and prosperity for Northeast Asia, a free and open Indo-Pacific region and beyond. In order to look at the scope of US-ROK global cooperation, I'd like to first explain the Biden-Harris administration's foreign policy outlook in the Indo-Pacific and around the world. We have long put forward a vision of peace and stability, freedom of the seas, unimpeded commerce, advancing human rights, a commitment to the rules-based international order, and the recognition that our common interests are not zero-sum. In the face of growing threats to that order, the United States is fortifying our key partnerships, which have been and will be grounded in respect, candor, openness, inclusiveness, shared interests, and mutual benefits. And we will always remain true to our values and support those who seek a better future for all people. In the 21st century, the world is more interconnected and interdependent, and we must step up to take on new challenges ranging from the crisis of climate change to global pandemics to cybersecurity. And we must create new opportunities, including clean energy and secure supply chains. And most importantly, we must do this together. The United States will pursue a free and open Indo-Pacific that promotes our interests and those of our partners and allies. We're a proud part of the Indo-Pacific, and this region is critically important to our nation's security and prosperity. In addition to deepening close bilateral relations, we will work multilaterally through long-standing institutions like the United Nations, as well as with ASEAN, which remains central to the region's architecture. As I said, we must work to achieve these goals together, more importantly with allies like the Republic of Korea. Our alliance is enduring and is built upon our shared values and a deep friendship between the American and Korean peoples, and the importance both our countries attach to this partnership in creating peace, security, and prosperity across the globe. Our task is to determine how best to do so as we face the challenges of the 21st century. In terms of one of the real hotspots or one of the areas of great concern around the world today, COVID. Part of figuring out how to use our US-ROK bilateral relationship for the global good is looking at our efforts to address the COVID-19 pandemic. In the early months of the pandemic, the United States and the ROK collaborated to establish robust travel screening measures to preserve air links between our countries, and assisted with repatriating each other's citizens. The ROK donated critical medical supplies to the United States, including 2.5 million protective masks, and facilitated the purchase of 750,000 COVID-19 tests. In support of vaccination efforts, the US government successfully delivered 1 million doses of the J&J single-shot vaccine to the ROK on June 4th, and an additional 400,000 doses on August 15th. Following the bilateral summit between President Biden and President Moon, the United States and the ROK created a comprehensive Chorus global vaccine partnership for the purposes of strengthening our joint response capabilities for infectious disease through international vaccine cooperation. The administration is working with the ROK to expand global COVID-19 vaccine manufacturing through a senior-level Chorus Global Vaccine Partnership Experts Group. Turning to climate change, President Biden has centered the climate crisis at the forefront of our country's foreign policy and national security planning. The president and the entire administration have looked to the ROK as a critical partner and leader in the global effort to combat the climate crisis. And at each stage, the ROK has responded. At the Leaders Summit on Climate in April, President Biden urged all leaders to demonstrate their commitment to enhanced action to fight climate change. For our part, we announced a substantial increase in our Paris commitment to reduce our emissions by 50 to 52% by 2030. President Moon declared the ROK would cease all public financing for new overseas coal power projects, a critical step in setting the stage for G7 countries to declare the same a few months later. That in turn likely influenced President Xi's decision to announce last week that China would stop building new coal plants abroad. Although we still seek more details on President Xi's pledge, we are confident external actions, including those by our two governments, contributed to this decision. And now we are 5 weeks away from COP26 at Glasgow. We look forward to the ROK reaffirming its climate leadership by announcing an enhanced and ambitious nationally determined contribution, or as we refer to it as NDC, as soon as possible. Doing so, as other advanced democratic economies like Canada, the EU, Japan, the UK, and the United States have done, will send a powerful signal to other major emitters to come to Glasgow with reduction targets required to keep the world's goal of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius within reach. Through our ongoing dialogues on the Indo-Pacific in coordination with the ROK New Southern Policy, the US-ROK alliance is increasingly focused on a future-oriented partnership, including cooperation on health security, science and technology, renewable energy, law enforcement, cybersecurity, and cooperation with the Pacific Island countries, the Mekong sub-region, and ASEAN. Another aspect of our relationship we must prioritize is our economic and trade ties. The ROK is now the world's 10th largest economy, a leading manufacturer of semiconductors, automobiles, and EV batteries, a major source of cultural exports like K-pop and popular Korean dramas, and an important global hub for technology and innovation. The ROK boasts a remarkable economic development success story and is the first former aid recipient country to become a member of the OECD's Development Assistance Committee. Our trade and investment relationship is strong and growing and based on our shared values and commitment to market-based approaches to economic growth. We have a deep science and technology collaboration, which strengthens our economic ties and mutual prosperity. The United States is the ROK's second largest trading partner, and the ROK is America's sixth largest. Likewise, the United States is the second largest investor in the ROK, while Korean foreign direct investment, Korean FDI in the United States has more than tripled in the past decade. America is the largest foreign direct investment destination for Korean investors, ahead of China and Vietnam. And this is just the beginning. Our companies announced more than $25 billion in mutual investments in each other's economies at the US-ROK summit in May. Across both our countries, people-to-people ties are a critical part of the foundation upon which this enduring security and economic relationship has been built. Over 1.7 million Korean students have enrolled in schools in the United States since 1955. During the 2019-2020 academic year, more than 49,000 Korean students came to the United States, making the ROK the #3 sender worldwide of international students to the United States. We share a deep appreciation for each other's culture, history, and commitment to democracy. With reference to the DPRK, the top US priority is to work toward the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We know this will not be easy. To reach our objective, we are taking a calibrated, practical approach that will explore diplomacy with the DPRK. As part of this effort, President Biden appointed Ambassador Sung Kim as the special representative for the DPRK, and longtime DPRK expert Dr. Jung Pak is serving as the deputy special representative. Denuclearization is an aim that has remained constant for 4 administrations, and one to which Pyongyang has previously committed in multiple documents. Our diplomatic efforts will build on the 2018 Singapore Joint Statement and other past documents and statements, including the 2018 Panmunjom Declaration and the 2005 Six-Party Talks Joint Statement. To that end, we have reached out directly to Pyongyang to initiate dialogue and stand ready to meet without preconditions. It's on this basis that we hope the DPRK will come to the table to discuss our respective intentions and concerns and explore what progress may be achievable. However, we should be clear. The United States is concerned by and condemns the DPRK's recent ballistic missile launches. These launches are in violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions and pose a threat to the DPRK's neighbors and other members of the international community. The DPRK's unlawful weapon of mass destruction and ballistic missile programs constitute serious threats to international peace and security and undermine the global non-proliferation regime. As such, the United States will continue to work closely with our allies and partners, especially the ROK and Japan, as well as others with an interest in establishing peace and prosperity in the region, to chart a path toward the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. We have a responsibility to implement the UN Security Council resolutions addressing the DPRK, just as we implement other UN Security Council resolutions. We will continue to call on all UN member states to fulfill their international obligations as well, in line with our goal of reinforcing global counterproliferation efforts. This keeps us all safer. Furthermore, consistent with the Biden-Harris administration's focus on human rights, we will advocate for the human rights of the North Korean people. We are also prepared to work cooperatively with the DPRK to address areas of shared humanitarian concern. The United States will continue to support the provision of humanitarian aid consistent with international standards for access and monitoring to the most vulnerable North Koreans, regardless of progress on denuclearization. We will lend our support to inter-Korean humanitarian cooperation projects, and we hope to resume cooperation in recovering the remains of US servicemen still missing from the Korean War. Moreover, we are open to exploring meaningful, confidence-building initiatives. Turning to our trilateral cooperation, few trilateral relationships are more important than the one between the ROK, Japan, and the United States. Our 3 countries are resilient, we share common security objectives, and our trilateral defense cooperation is more important than ever. The trilateral meeting Secretary Blinken just hosted in New York, as well as the meeting between Deputy Secretary Sherman, Japanese Vice Foreign Minister Mori, and ROK First Vice Minister Che in Tokyo this past July, both underscored the importance of our trilateral cooperation. What really stood out in these discussions is that while our alliances with the ROK and Japan have spanned many decades, our goals and cooperation are modern and forward-looking. We're working together to address the most difficult 21st century challenges, not just in Northeast Asia or the Indo-Pacific, but across the globe. The United States, the Republic of Korea, and Japan are working together to strengthen bilateral and trilateral cooperation to address challenges like climate change, COVID-19, supply chain resiliency, cyber threats, and threats to the rules-based international order and human rights on a global scale. In all of our engagements, we have reaffirmed support for ASEAN centrality and the ASEAN-led regional architecture, and also discussed efforts to support the people of Burma and a return to democracy there. As shown by the expansive breadth of our discussions, our three countries have many opportunities for trilateral cooperation. And then that cooperation will benefit our peoples and the world more broadly. This was just the first of many discussions to come. And we look forward to convening meetings at the Deputy Secretary, Vice Minister level on a quarterly basis, a reflection of our commitment to advancing the trilateral agenda. Finally, what I'd like to say is that defending freedom, championing opportunity, upholding human rights, and respecting the rule of law, all fundamental values we share with the Republic of Korea, are at the center of the Biden-Harris administration's foreign policy. Our military and defense ties are unwavering, and our shared values and ever-increasing diplomatic, economic, security, and people-to-people ties are strong and enduring. The breadth of US-ROK cooperation covers nearly the entire span of human endeavor and is essential to addressing the challenges of the 21st century. America's alliances are our greatest asset, and leading with diplomacy means standing shoulder to shoulder with our allies and key partners. The United States and the Republic of Korea have stood side by side for over 70 years, and we look forward to expanding our cooperation in the years to come as we work together to achieve global peace, security, and prosperity. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our first panel, Science, Technology, and Innovation, Operationalizing the Next Phase of US-ROK Strategic Economic Partnership. My name is Dr. Mian Oh. I'm Director and Senior Fellow of the Atlantic Council's Asia Security Initiative, part of the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. So as some of you may heard, Fred, our President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, said during his opening remarks, this year's forum comes at an especially important time for the alliance, as we are at the key inflection point as the geopolitical and economic architecture of the Indo-Pacific and the world has been changing with enduring US-China competition, as well as with the digitalized world economy and emerging technology, and of course, COVID pandemic. As highlighted in the US-ROK leaders' joint statement this past May between President Biden and President Moon, the United States and the Republic of Korea have committed to a bold agenda of enhanced and expanded cooperation, including fostering strong and resilient supply chains, deepening bilateral effort in outer space and across the new digital frontiers, and safeguarding a trusted value-driven digital and technological ecosystem in line with our shared democratic values. And all of these developments have potentially major geopolitical and strategic implications, not just for the alliance, but for the broader Indo-Pacific and rules-based international system. So I think it is clear that the next important steps here is to develop follow-up policies from the two countries that have provided a concrete and specific roadmap on how to implement these promises into specific policies and action. And it is very timely to discuss the most pressing issues facing the US-ROK alliance and economic partnership with this distinguished group of panelists today. So I'm really eager to dive into key topics, and in the interest of everyone's time, I'd like to start by briefly introducing today's panelists. First, we have Ambassador Choi Seok-young, who is the former ROK ambassador and permanent representative to the Office of the United Nations and other international organizations in Geneva, and a senior advisor at Lee & Co. Ambassador Choi is a highly experienced expert in handling a broad range of bilateral and multilateral diplomatic matters and has a particularly extensive record of diplomatic accomplishments with regard to WTO and regional trade agreement matters, as well as various United Nations issues and concerns. Next, we have Dr. Sarah Staton, Deputy Director of the Office of Science and Technology Cooperation in the Bureau of Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. Dr. Staton has worked on science and technology at the State Department since 2014 and was previously an NRC postdoctoral fellow at the Naval Research Laboratory. Next, we have Dr. Bob Atkinson, founder and president of the Information Technology and Innovation Foundation, ITIF. As you may know, ITF is at the cutting edge of science and technology policy, and Dr. Atkinson is an internationally recognized scholar and widely published author, whom the New Republican has named one of the 3 most important thinkers about the innovation. And Washingtonian Magazine has called him a tech titan, and Government Technology Magazine also has judged to be one of the 25 top doers, dreamers, and drivers of the information technology. And finally, we have Gunn Lee, Director General of the Bilateral Economic Affairs at the ROK Ministry of Foreign Affairs. DG Lee has served a career diplomat with MOFA for nearly 3 decades, and having been posted in various ROK embassies across the globe, including the People's Republic of China, Vietnam, and Laos. She has also served as ambassador and deputy permanent representative as the Korean permanent mission to UN office and other international organizations in Geneva. So thank you all for joining us today. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone that this is open to the public and our audience to submit their questions via the Q&A function on Zoom. And I'll try to draw on any relevant questions during the session. So with that, I'd like to invite each speaker to deliver brief opening remarks, starting with DG Lee.
Can I speak now? Thank
Yes.
you very much for the kind introductions. And also, since this is the first open session after the keynote speech, I just want to touch upon what's going on after our eventful May summit meetings, especially in the areas of science and technology and innovations. I have been meeting with our counterparts in the State Department, exchanging notes and also checklists, and also doing our homework to follow up on what has been agreed by our two leaders. Of course, there are also other areas that we are working on, such as climate change issues and vaccine partnerships, but I want to touch on the supply chain issues and science and technology R&D cooperation specifically. Especially, I just want to touch, before I move on to what actually I have been working on the Korea-U.S. economic relationships, because we have at the May summit meetings, our partnerships has expanded not only in the security areas but also in the economic relationship, but now also expanding to the science and technology corporations. But all of these have been possible because of the Korea-U.S. FTAs that has been signed 10 years ago. Since the KORUS FTAs, the investment has tripled, the trade has also doubled. So we are here because of the KORUS FTAs that was concluded 10 years ago. And also at the May summit meeting, there have been some announcements by our Korean companies like SK Innovations, LG, also Hyundai Automobiles for further investments here in the United States on the areas of automobile semiconductors and also batteries. So these are they were possible because we see the market increasing here in the United States. I was very happy to visit Atlanta, Georgia, when I visited here in July. President Moon also visited Atlanta. He visited the SK battery plants, but I was very fortunate to be offered to visit Georgia Atlanta Kia automobile plant, and it is quite amazing because they have set up the plants, which is very beneficial to the community, and also they design the very famous Kia automobiles Telluride. Which was designed in San Francisco, manufactured in Atlanta plants, and also exported to other third countries. This embodies the very model of how the two countries work together in terms of the investment. And I just heard that there was also another announcement by the SK Innovations with the joint ventures of the four to build new battery plants in Kentucky and Tennessee. So we are going to see a lot more investments from our Korean companies, which will create jobs here and also contribute to the transformations of the U.S. economy into a green economy in the futures. So we are working with the governments also together in order to see whether there would be more incentives from the federal government and also from the state governments. It will be very crucial for our investment companies to settle well and also succeed here in the long terms. Also in the areas of supply chains, we have been working very closely with our counterparts here in the different sectors in terms of the batteries and also in the semiconductors, rare earths, to secure a very stable long-term growth in those areas. Supply chain is very important these days because we have been engaged and dependent on the safety of and also very efficient supply chains. So I think we will have a lot of work to do in the futures. Well, in the areas of science and technologies, the two leaders have agreed on the various areas of critical and emerging technologies such as 5G telecommunications, 6G, and also AI, data, and also the quantum technologies. So we are working very closely with different agencies, ministries, and academia in order to build up the platforms and also the institutional arrangements in order to identify where we can build up on those technological advancements. But what is very much very important and critical is the exchange of the people that embody those talents and also the knowledge. So I think it is very important that we build upon the face-to-face and person-to-person exchanges that we have had in the futures. So that's why there is a bill pending on the Hill called the Partners with Korea Act, which we pursue our talents to acquire visa for professionals. So that our students who have been studying here in the universities in the U.S. to secure the jobs that they could have. So I hope that there would be a lot of exchanges and discussions that would be able to help us as a government to form and create the right arrangements, institutions, and mechanisms to help our companies and help our people to work together. And I will be very much happy to listen to any proposals and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, DG Lee. And now I'd like to turn to Dr. Staten for your remarks.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here with such a distinguished panel, and thank you to the Atlantic Council for putting this event together. As we all know, science, technology, and innovation are the backbone of economic growth and opportunity, and international collaboration is absolutely vital component to make sure that there are positive impacts for science and technology. We bring together minds with science and technology and resources from diverse backgrounds to advance our understanding of the world around us and address global challenges. More minds working together in those same problems can answer those problems and questions faster and help to progress and accelerate solutions. But these collaborations also need to be on the foundation of shared values. Values like transparency, reciprocity, diversity, inclusion, equity, and openness, which help us to ensure that cooperation going forward has both security, safety, and benefits for all. We know that the United States and the Republic of Korea are strong partners who both share these values. And we deeply appreciate the science and technology cooperation that the United States and ROK Science and Technology Agreement has afforded us, and are thankful that it is going strong now and over its 20th year. In the same summit that she alluded to, but President Biden and Moon earlier this year gave an excellent direction for science and technology cooperation for the two countries. And we committed to areas like quantum and AI, but as well as clean energy and other emerging tech areas. Our science technology relationship is strong, and we are working together in these directions through engagements through things like our joint committee meetings, as well as other opportunities through the interagency and science cooperation. In our most recent meeting held in December of 2020, we covered such topics as research integrity to make sure that our systems are interoperable and strengthen the science and technology enterprise during COVID-19. My colleagues in the Department of State's Economics Bureau and Business Affairs also are engaging Korea in digital economy issues such as 5G and Open RAN in an ongoing basis, culminating in the US-ROK ICT Policy Forum. And we're hoping that the 6th round of this dialogue can be scheduled very near in the future. We're also looking to expand digital connectivity and build cybersecurity capacity in the Indo-Pacific region together, including through cooperation in our development partnership. There are so many more elements to be able to celebrate in our science and technology innovation collaboration. In May, Korea became the 10th nation to sign on to the Artemis Accords. The Artemis Accords are non-binding set of principles that govern space behaviors and will enable interoperability of the US and ROK GPS, or global positioning systems. In communication, the Korean Institute of Information Communications Technology Planning and Evaluation and the United States Science and Science Foundation signed an MOU on 6G and future wireless technologies just earlier this year. Both of our countries have engaged in so many areas, including infectious disease research, which is of the highest importance right now. But not only just on COVID-19, but also research looking at tuberculosis, antimicrobial resistance, and HIV/AIDS, as well as looking at the human and animal health interface, where the U.S. Geological Survey worked with Korea to stand up their first National Wildlife Disease Control Center just last year. On energy collaboration, the Department of Energy and Korea have had many successful years of collaboration on the Korean superconducting tokamak advanced research, or K-STAR, to reach advanced fusion technology, which will be imperative and as we look forward to solving the energy challenges of today and tomorrow. These past, present, and future collaborations align well with the U.S. domestic science, technology, and innovation priorities, which include pandemic preparedness, prevention, tackling climate change, catalyzing research and development in critical and emerging technologies, innovation and equity, and national security and economic resilience. In lines of values that I mentioned earlier, the Biden-Harris administration is working to promote diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, as well as scientific integrity, STEM education, workforce development, and research responsibility in the United States and in the global science and technology enterprise system. Given the global nature of both scientific research and the transnational nature of the challenges that we face, whether we're talking about pandemics, climate change, or even the basics of physical research, we will be unable to succeed in this mission without close cooperation from our allies and partners. We are also recognize the challenges that equity and opportunity deal with our own domestic systems in science, and we are committed to being able to work with marginalized and underrepresented groups. I know that we will have a full panel discussion here momentarily, but I wanted to touch on a few topics to be able to highlight in AI. For example, on AI technologies, we believe that AI can uplift and empower all people, and the United States seeks to promote responsible design, development, and deployment of AI in line with democratic values and human rights, which I know are values shared with our Korean counterparts. And with quantum information sciences, the United States is taking a science-first approach, which means that we are prioritizing strong investment in basic research and technological breakthroughs. And we're very interested in being able to compare the approaches that the Koreans are taking at this time so that we can look at our shared interests in this area and opportunities for engagement. The same is true in biotechnologies. The United States is prioritizing safe, secure, and sustainable biomanufacturing and innovation, biotechnology research and development, and working together with like-minded partners and allies like you, we hope to foster a vibrant and secure global bioeconomy that addresses international concerns and emergencies, including pandemics, natural disasters, and climate change. I look forward to continuing this discussion and for future collaboration for the group for many years to come with our positive U.S. Republic of Korea Science and Technology collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Staten. I'd like to turn to Ambassador Che for your remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Oh, for invitation for this prestigious forum. Actually, the joint statement by the two leaders last May is a landmark event defining a traditional security alliance of the two countries, and also the comprehensive partnership ranging from infrastructure, climate change, science and technology, etc., etc. And in time of a confrontation, between United States and China. It's a strategic competition. U.S. is committed to form a technology alliance based on shared value with its allies. The value was mentioned in the joint statement is that democracy and also the rule of law and the human rights protections. But at the same time, China has also taken countermeasures to this U.S. move. China introduced a series of actions, for example, foreign investment review rules and also export control rules. And China also introduced a new concept of comprehensive security, ranging from traditional security, economy, technology, and other areas. With that in mind, supply chains would be easily decoupled under this confrontational situation. And actually, this is the collision of the systems, which is state capitalism on the side of China, and also market mechanism on the side of United States. In order to ensure supply chain resilience, I think we have to bear in mind around 3 points. Number one, actually, United States is working together with the allies in order to ensure supply chains. Then a close consultation with its allies is very necessary. U.S. is working with its allies, but some of the allies are located in a very vulnerable situations because of their economic dependency on China. Global chain is very complex, ranging from sourcing and planning and production, distribution, and sales. So complex supply chains cannot be completely decoupled. Therefore, the interdependence of economy should exist for a while. Under that situation, some allies of the United States may be put in a very vulnerable situation. They could be exposed to the weaponization of economic interdependence. Then actually, United States should cooperate with its allies considering this kind of situations. Second, the regional cooperation. Korea-US cooperation in the area of economics and science and technologies are very robust, and it will continue to be strengthened. But in order to work together with its allies, the United States should also take a firm position and clear position in the regional cooperation architecture. For example, last week we heard China just submitted accession application to the CPTPP, the regional architecture. China also joined RCEP agreement, where the United States is not actually included. And China is moving proactive in joining CPTPP. But United States withdrew from TPP 2018 after President Trump took office. And then thereafter, we haven't heard any concrete actually positions from the United States on these particular issues. Regional trade architecture is also giving far-reaching implications in supply chains because of the accumulation of the rules of origins. Therefore, if China moves first, then the United States should also take positions to counter these actions. Lastly, the digital technology. In order to manage and monitor the supply chains, the role of digital technology is quite important. In Asia Pacific, we have witnessed the emergence of several types of digital trade rules, ranging from USMCA, CPTPP, and also Singapore-Australian digital agreement, and Singapore, New Zealand, and Chilean digital agreement they are emerging. But these digital rules are very much fragmented without the presence of the United States. There is a very strong need to ensure supply chains resilience. The standardization of the digital technologies are very much required, and we look forward to the United States leadership in these areas. Many experts are suggesting that U.S. may take the initiative to have a Trilateral agreement on digital trade rules, but so far, actually, we haven't heard from U.S. government on this particular agenda items. Thank you. I have to stop here.
Thank you, Ambassador. So now I'd like to turn to Bob. Thank you so much for your patience.
Well, thank you so much. It's a really pleasure to be here. Pleasure to be here with my Korean colleagues. I just want to make a couple of generalized framing remarks and then go to a couple of specific things I think that cooperation would be useful in. The U.S. didn't need to really worry about cooperation 30 years ago because we were dominant. We were the best technology economy on the planet. We had capabilities in virtually every area. And so we didn't, and China wasn't even on the map. We had no real foreign policy challenger who had technological capabilities. That's all very different today. The U.S. now spends less on R&D than we did as a share of GDP than prior to Sputnik, which is, 54? That's Congress is trying, and the Biden administration are trying to turn that around, but who knows? We'll see where it goes. So we don't have as many domestic resources, which means we need to be partnering more. Secondly, the whole process of innovation has gotten much more complex, much more difficult. My colleague Nick Bloom and John Van Reenen, Nick was at Stanford. They did a really groundbreaking research study a few years ago where they looked at the productivity of research. And what they found was that it's harder each year to get the same technological breakthrough as it was the year before. Now, that's not because scientists have gotten lazy. It's because the technology challenges have gotten harder. Good example of that when they talk about early 70s, assuming one engineer to get a Moore's Law advancement for Intel. Today, it takes 72 engineers. 72 times as many engineers to get a Moore's Law advancement. So just things are much more complicated, they're much more difficult. And then finally, obviously, China. China is not, as ITF has written for over a decade, they're not a normal country. And by that I mean a country that has reasonable technology policies and relies on the market. That's not what they do. They're what we would term an innovation mercantilist economy that doesn't play by the rules. And they have, on top of that, they have a goal, in our view, of technological autarky. They want to be dominant, not just good, they want to be dominant in virtually every single advanced technology. So that's different than, say, Korea, where you're really good at, 6, 7 areas, you can pick them, really good. But you don't pretend you're not trying to make wide-body aircraft. You're going to leave that up to the US and Europe. So you have a division of labor. The Chinese don't do that. So I think there's two kinds of cooperation we could have. One is more traditional diplomatic cooperation and development. So could we have agreements with countries in Africa or Latin America? Those are all good. But I think what we need to be thinking about is a new kind of partnership, which is more around the area of competitiveness. Rather than just sort of foreign policy, let's just do this because we want to have better relationships with Chile or something. We need to be thinking about partnerships more strategically. How can we build really strong partnerships to build up our capabilities and our partners' capabilities, particularly vis-a-vis China? So let me suggest a few areas, building a little bit on what the ambassador said. Number one, I think we need to be We need more cooperation on export controls. The Chinese are masters at playing countries and companies off against each other. I think we need more cooperation in terms of confronting Chinese subsidies. I think it's going to be very hard, for example, for SK and Samsung in memory if the Chinese continue to pour tens of billions of dollars just writing checks to memory factories. At minimum, it's going to flood the market and reduce margins. I think also in terms of can we have more cooperation between our companies so that we're not hijacked and forced to transfer technology to the Chinese. The Chinese know that they have companies over a barrel because if Samsung doesn't do it, they'll get Intel to do it. So we could cooperate there. I think in supply chain areas, yes, I agree we can't and probably shouldn't think about a complete decoupling in supply chains with China. But we have, if the Chinese wanted to, they could really throw a monkey wrench into our affairs. They could hold us hostage. Now, we could probably do the same thing with them on certain things, so it's mutually assured destruction, if you will, into the supply chain world. But I think we should be thinking collectively of how do we reduce that dependency, and I think joint supply chain mapping efforts are critical. I think in terms of technology cooperation, one is, we have a set of university research centers that we fund through mostly NSF, but DOE, DOD. Why can't we be thinking about allowing Korean universities with support an American center, so a particular center on 6G, we could have partners from both sides on a center like that. I think another area would be the U.S. is going to increasingly move towards pre-competitive industry research grants and centers in areas. We're already doing that with our Manufacturing USA centers, things like process technology and biotech, 3D printing. Seems like there's an opportunity to jointly partner with what Korea is doing there. And the last thing I'll say, partnership is, at the end of the day, it's fundamentally about trust. And it's about the view that together we're going to be better than we are separately. And I would just encourage or caution perhaps my Korean friends, don't go down the European path. We have the European Tech and Trade Council tomorrow that's meeting in Pittsburgh. And while I'm hopeful and optimistic there'll be some good things that come out of that, underlying that is a very, very maybe deep suspicion and disappointment with what Europe has done. Europe has articulated what they call technological sovereignty, and that's directed at U.S. companies. They have a whole set of data policies directed at the U.S. economy to limit what we can do. They're using antitrust as a weapon, and many, many other things. And I don't mean to say that they're nefarious people. They're pursuing that agenda. I get it. But that has reduced the trust on the U.S. side with Europe. And so I would encourage us in Korea, particularly in the data area, that you think through, as the ambassador said, could we get an Asian data partnership, maybe building on former Prime Minister Abe's free flow of data with trust initiative. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really excellent, really insightful remarks. And I think we have a lot of topics to cover. And for the first question, I would like to, focus more on China. And we heard the word of value so much from all of you today. And as I mentioned briefly, the joint statement from the May summit, it says that the two countries are going to commit to safeguarding a trusted, value-driven digital and technological ecosystem. And so I think it could be it could sound a very promising concept, but then to the foreign policy community, I think it may not sound as a tangible concept. So how do you define value-driven digital and technological ecosystem and to really think about the definition of this concept, we really have to, just bring into U.S.-China competition on this context. And we, talk a lot about China, and what U.S. has been doing in terms of enhancing domestic self-sufficiency in terms of critical technologies. But at the same time, China also has its dual circulation strategy, which is trying to really step up the domestic, basically their domestic production, and as Ambassador Che said, not just production, but distribution and sales, right? So what would be the value-driven approach in terms of this uncharted territory, and what the US-ROK alliance could do, and also not just in terms of bilaterally, but in terms of working with other allies and partners. And maybe I could start with Ambassador Che.
Yeah, actually, great question. The value-driven supply chains, in my view, democracy, market mechanisms, and also the level playing field, the protection of IPRs, and open and efficient operational systems. They should be worked together with allies very closely. And also, in terms of the data protection, and also the issue of the server localization is one of the controversial issues in the digital the agreements. But all in all, the value-based digital cooperation is to combat digital authoritarianism in this confrontational world between United States and China.
Thank you. And Dr. Staten?
I would point out that it's important at every level. So it's not just at the supply chain level, it's also the basic R&D. How do we know that, when joint IP is created, how is that going to be divided so that we can avoid conflicts that might come down the road? Obviously, we have science and technology agreements to help that at the federal collaboration level, but kind of looking at digital collaborations in that regard. And then also making sure that those agreements can be quickly actionable. So, looking at the collaboration on data and transfer for biotech data, specifically under COVID-19 circumstances. I think that there's been a strong collaboration to be able to share information there. And so using that as maybe a model for how can those value-driven opportunities allow us to action quickly so that there can be mutual benefit.
Thank you. Dr. Ekisu?
I think a few things. One, I think certainly the U.S. does this, and I don't know, Korea does. I assume you do. I'm sorry, I don't know. But I think both of us reaffirming the nature that the internet governance should be stakeholder-driven, not government-driven, which is what the Chinese and the Russians want in particular. They want to move internet governance over to the ITU, which I think would be a terrible mistake. It's a bottom-up consensus-based process. It works really, really well. Secondly, the whole notion of how standards are developed. The Chinese are sort of come around to giving lip service to the notion that industry standards are voluntary and cooperative and industry-led. But fundamentally, they're manipulating that process. I don't think the Korean government goes to Samsung and says, you have to have this standard. I think that's something Samsung decides on their own, and that's what our companies do. That's not how it works in China. So again, reaffirming that industry-led standards mean industry and companies decide on their own without coercion and without pressure. And then the last area would be around IT and the use by government. Clearly the Chinese abuse that data. I don't want to say it's Orwellian, but it's in the Orwellian ballpark, let's say. They use data to spy on their citizens, and we both reject that. But the area where I worry that we can go with that, and I see the Europeans sometimes wanting to go there, is to say, well, having responsibility and human rights and all that means that we have to have a privacy law like the GDPR. And I fundamentally reject that notion. The U.S. has good privacy rules. Our companies comply. I don't think we should let that whole question be conflated with much more fundamental questions, which are really about how government uses data and do they use it in a way that respects their citizens' rights? I mean, clearly the US government uses data, the NSA uses data, the FBI uses data, but they use it in a legal framework that's very, very constrained, and we have legal rights, and Korea is the same, and I think we should be highlighting that big difference.
Thank you. And Director General Lee, would you like to comment quickly?
Well, with regard to the digital economy and the data flows, I think it will be very important in the futures that will dominate the economic systems and structures. I think there are areas where the stakeholders, as you said, and the market force to drive this trend. I mean, there are always new sources of economic, commercial profits for the companies to pursue, but also there are also sensitivities in terms of data privacy, and it is a big concern for the Koreans also. So there should be a balanced approach and holistic approach. But what is important is as the value of democracy, human rights, transparency, those principles should be kept. And always, I think it is important that we have of discussions opened between the governments and industries and academias, and also in terms of the development of future technologies. So I think we should keep in mind that we have discussions opened to counteract any kind of anti-movements in terms of digital processes. There's a proverb in Korea saying that don't hate your mother-in-law because you're going to be like your mother-in-law in the futures. So I think we have too much focus on what China is doing or what China is saying, but I think we should actually look into ourselves whether we are going to abide by the universal laws of democracies and human rights and try to strengthen our supply chains and resilience among the allies and partners.
Thank you. So since we cover supply chain, so I'd like to have a follow-up question on supply chain resiliency, actually. So I think the key pillar of the U.S. supply chain policy is building domestic manufacturing capacity and by creating opportunities for cooperation with allies. But allies, as Director General Lee mentioned, briefly from her opening remarks about this, Ford, co-investment with SK Innovation. But at the same time, so allies are interested in direct investment in the United States for building the domestic production. But at the same time, they also have their plans to increase their domestic production. And as we have seen, from EU and Japan and South Korea in semiconductor belt, it's also one example that South Korea has been doing. And I think, so just following up on DG Lee just talk about not just focusing on China, I think there's a strategic opportunity that the United States can work together with allies and partners, including South Korea, in the third country. So would you like to share your suggestions? What would be the key areas and opportunities and challenges that the US and allies and partners can work together? And for example, like Vietnam or other countries in South Asia, US, Korea, do you think it's really realistic next steps to explore? And maybe, can I start with Ambassador Che?
Right. Actually, the Korea, United States can work together in third country to promote the bilateral relations. In fact, in the joint statement made last May, clearly mentioned actually, they have some indicative list of the cooperative works. For example, climate change challenges. In order to cope with the climate change challenges, they could work together with the energy sectors in third countries. They can share the technologies, and also they can jointly move to third country as a joint investment. But there are many other areas they could work in the third countries. particularly in the health areas. The Korea-US formed already a vaccine partnership. If they would work together very closely on this area, then they could share their experience with third countries in these areas.
Thank you. Dr. Seaton?
And I really appreciate the creativity of being able to find these kind of trilateral opportunities. I agree absolutely with what you just said, but right now we're also exploring whether we could use some of the programs that the State Department has to be able to create these trilateral opportunities, whether it might be in health or in climate change, where we would take scientists from both the United States and Korea and put them together in a third-party country to be able to tackle some of those issues in a really tangible way. So I think that it's feasible both on maybe the more probably R&D or applied science focus, but as well as on some of the supply chain issues, being able to look at like semiconductors. How do you map those supply chains and say, is it necessarily in Southeast Asia where you would look for that third party country, or if you're looking at chip production and manufacturing, are you necessarily going to be looking into Europe to be able to create that partnership that would satisfy within semiconductors?
So I think it's a difficult question, somewhat politically, because the domestic politics in the U.S. are, we just want to reshore and attract. So, hey, LG's putting a factory here, fantastic, and then we want to reshore a bunch of U.S. stuff from China. That's easier said than done. It's not going to happen. No matter what we do, we're not going to be able to take the China production system and move it here. It's impossible. What we should try to do, though, in my view, is we should try to weaken the Chinese production system and strengthen places like Vietnam and India. Because if we do that, the reason I say that is these are part of the advantage you have in China is wages. They're still lower than Korea's wages. They're still lower than U.S. wages. But the second advantage China has now is that they have spent the last 30 years buying up pieces of the supply chain, getting them there, and then once they're there, there's this complex ecosystem that's really, really hard to walk away from. So if you look at the surveys of U.S. companies, many of them are like, we're not leaving China. We can't. If we go to India, it's like just us. So I think we have to think a little more strategically. Are there components of that supply chain that could, with support from both countries, maybe Vietnam, and we say, let's do electronic assembly in Vietnam, and we work together on that. And you can't do this, but you could encourage your companies to put their facilities there. We could encourage ours there. We might have some incentives. But I think we have to be strategic about weakening China's position in some of these things, because right now the gravity is so strong. It's a centripetal force, not centrifugal. So we have to make it more centrifugal.
Thank you.
Well, first I want to emphasize that the supply chains is not only about bringing back the manufacturing industries back in the United States, but actually maximizing the whole supply chains that we have around the world. Especially, our administration has been promoting our South Asian policies and South Asian policies plus for the past 4 or 5 years. And that means that we have put a lot of investments and we have had a comprehensive relationships and partnership with the ASEAN countries. So we have invested in Indonesia recently by the Hyundai automobiles for electric cars. We have Vietnam with the investments by Samsung on the electronic goods and semiconductors. We have Malaysia working on the solar cells with our Hanha and LG chemicals. So we have a very good basis in ASEAN countries around. So in terms of having the supply chains very secure and resilient, it means that we have to work together with those partners around the world. And also, I think I have heard a lot about this industrial policies in the United States, which is quite unfamiliar vocabulary. And I just want to caution that all these investments and technological corporations should be market-driven. And also the voices of the business should be heard more carefully in terms of the investments, because they are quite aware of the cost in having investments here in the United States. So there are a lot of works to do in terms of the government's incentives, but also I think the logistics issue and the labor shortage is also another problem that the U.S. also have to solve in order to attract more investments from outside.
Thank you. So, Ambassador Che, I'd like to follow quickly. So you mentioned about CPTPP earlier, and so given that both China and Taiwan announced that they're going to join CPTPP, do you think that would really change the regional geopolitics and economic architecture? And given your deep expertise on trade issues, what would you think the role of KORUS FTA would play a role in this current changing environment?
Right. In order to project its influence to the neighboring countries, China already promoted Made in China 2025, and as you just told earlier on, dual circulation economy, promoting domestic market at the same time interacting with foreign countries, and also the One Belt, One Road initiative to the neighboring countries. And on top of that, China joined RCEP, that is ASEAN, 10 countries plus 6 spoke countries. And then China announced its intention to join the CPTPP. That means China is building up multi-layer the regional cooperation architecture in order to expand their influence. The question is whether Chinese intention to join CPTPP would be feasible or would be easily acceptable by CPTPP 11 countries. That is a good question, because in the CPTPP has several provisions, chapters, for example, state-owned enterprises chapters. In my personal view, China may have a lot of difficulties in complying with these provisional obligations. And another difficulty China would confront would be the non-market economy status provisions, which are appearing in USMCA. USMCA is a US-Mexico-Canada agreement, prohibits those 3 countries to have a bilateral free trade agreement with non-market economic countries, that is China. Therefore, actually Mexico and Canada may have difficulties accepting China as a member of CPTPP. But in spite of that, China's move is very much strategic and political. They may have difficulties in joining the CPTPP, but in order to join the CPTPP, China may enter into negotiations with CPTPP countries, promoting their influence to the CPTPP members. Now the question is the United States. In the Asia Pacific, there are a growing number of regional architecture participated by China on the one hand, but on the other, United States pulled from TPP, and then U.S. voluntarily reduced its influence, projecting in this region. And many U.S. allies in Asia Pacific would like to see that U.S. would come back to this area as institutional actors. Of course, U.S. is very much active in the Indo-Pacific strategies, but that comprises only 4 countries. But there are also many other allies outside of Indo-Pacific. Of course, in this sense, U.S. may work together with Korea Indo-Pacific strategy and then Korea's southern and northern policy. There are some complementary actually in these two strategies. That would be a kind of area for the future cooperation. But you mentioned about the KOROS FTA. Korea-US FTA is a backbone and promoting economic cooperations between the two countries because this FTA is the highest quality free trade agreement, sharing the same values between the two countries. And U.S. may expand the quality of KOROS FTA to other neighboring countries in Asia Pacific. That could be used as a good benchmark to expand the U.S. interest.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Atkinson, so I'd like to follow up. You mentioned US-EU Trade and Technology Council, TTC, in which you have written a piece recently, right? You have written a piece recently, right?
Say that again?
You have written a piece recently on this issue. You wrote something, right? So, given that right now we're at the stage of rulemaking for these issues, and you said that there's a need for the United States and EU to push back against China's digital authoritarian regime, right? And despite potential retaliation, right? So, and Ambassador Che mentioned the dilemma that Korean economy is facing, and actually the private companies, they have to balance between their national security calculations and commercial interests. So, what would be your suggestions or advice to Korea and Korean companies with regard to this issue?
Keep your head down. Look, I think I always remember the story. I was co-chair of the U.S.-China Innovation Experts Group in the Obama administration for about 5 or 6 years, and sorry, talking about that. And we were over in Beijing ahead of the SNED dialogue. There was an innovation dialogue, and I was having lunch with some Chinese counterparts, fairly senior official, and I said, "Aren't you worried about the U.S. pushing you?" No, not really. We can hold our own against the U.S. I said, what about the G20? He said, no. There's just 19 other countries. They all fight among each other. He said, what we worry about is the G2. I said, what do you mean? He said, what we really worry about is Europe and America ganging up on us. And I think ultimately that, first of all, I don't think it's going to happen, unfortunately, because I don't think the Europeans have the spine to do it, the courage. They will let us fight their battles for them. But I think ultimately, countries like the U.S. and the EU as a region, we have to really step up. And once we do that, makes a safe space for countries like Korea. I think Japan also is a little bit farther out than Korea, and Japan could engage in that sort of trilateral effort. And to be clear, what I mean by that, I don't mean punishing China for the sake of punishing China. What I mean by that is having them systematically roll back their whole giant suite of unfair anti-market technology mercantilist practices. So, I think hopefully there's a bigger critical mass, and once it's there, I hope that Korea could help. But right now, you're right in the middle of two behemoths. You don't want to have that fight, I would argue.
Thank you. Great. So I'd like to ask a final question to DG Lee and Dr. Satan. So I don't think I'm a big fan of just drawing the line between, in terms of gender diversity, but I think it's true that it's not one of the usual, panel that we have, like 3 women on one panel stage. So from the joint statement, President Biden and President Moon place a particular emphasis on women, right? In the field of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics field. So would you like to elaborate on those, and could you like to share anything, in terms of the bilateral cooperation, or what like U.S. and China, South Korea is doing in terms of global goods?
Shall I? Okay. Well, with regard to women's economic empowerment, I think it is a very important subject that we haven't really dealt in the past as one of the agendas for the bilateral cooperations. Well, we have a mechanism with the State Departments called Senior Economic Dialogue that checks on all the economic issues regularly at the vice minister's level. And for the past 2 years, I think we had the action plan agreed by from the summit meetings on the women's economic empowerment. It has elapsed, and this time I would like to start again with a more concrete projects. Especially now the ESG is an important issues for the business communities. So I would like to see more business people, women business communities to kind of come together and to create a network or platforms where they can cooperate. And also we are trying to build programs for the women in STEM areas with our universities students for finding internships in the United States. So I'm talking very closely with our embassy people back in Seoul to see if there could be any concrete programs that we can develop. Korea is not on the top list of the gender equality, so there are still a lot of improvements to do. But I would like to focus more on those issues, because when I was back in the WTO, working on the WTO as an ambassador for economic affairs there, they had the gender champion, which is like whenever there is a meeting or the board meetings, you need to have the gender balance there. And also in the WTO, we had discussions about the importance of women's in trade, because 50% of the world is women. And when you empower women with their capacity on trade and economy, it actually helps the families and also the community, village, and the nations to develop fast. So these are the areas that I would really want to see further engagements and development between the two countries.
Thank you.
I just wanted to note, I was also at the SED, and the gender diversity of the Korean delegation was something that I marked to my colleagues, because the gender makeup of your delegation was superior to the US makeup. And so I think it's having the ability to reflect and to make decisions about who is representing, who is going to have us place at the table, whether that's purely within STEM or in diplomacy. Those are important pieces. And I think that the United States has had a focus, throughout, goodness gracious, a very long time on gender dynamics in STEM. And I find it really heartening that the Office of Science and Technology Policy is putting such a focus on it, specifically not at trying to have a magic bullet type answer, but looking at the issues of networking, allyship, sponsorship, and having programs that really key into specific points where female scientists have a tendency to leave the pool, including, if you're going to have additional responsibilities for parenting, how do you have, discrete grant programs that help women reintroduce themselves into the science workforce so that you don't lose out on that talent. And I find that those programs have been, need to grow, but it's a good start.
Thank you. So thank you so much. It's time to wrap up. I'd like to thank you again so much for our distinguished group of speakers. I think we cover a lot of issues, very important pressing issues that are facing not just the United States, not just ROK, but for the world. So thank you so much. And we're gonna take a break, and we will resume the session in 5 minutes on security issues. Thank you so much. welcome back for those who joined us for the first panel, and good afternoon for those who are just joining for our second panel, Advancing the Security Alliance on the Peninsula and across the Indo-Pacific. My name is Dr. Mian Oh. I'm the Director and Senior Fellow of the Atlantic Council's Asia Security Initiative, housed in the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. So we are already near the end of President Biden's first year in office and look ahead to a presidential election in Korea. So I believe it would be very timely to talk about the most pressing opportunities and challenges that the US-ROK alliance faces with the rapidly changing geopolitical and economic landscape, and with what we what has happened in Kabul and what we have seen, the new security trilateral pact of AUKUS and the Quad Summit last Friday. And last night, missile launch from North Korea has also added to the list of pressing topics to discuss for today. And all of this ongoing development have deep implications in terms of the trajectory of US-China relations, which is also going to shape the future trajectory of the alliance, including the US-ROK alliance, but also of the broader Indo-Pacific. And we have a fantastic group of panelists today, so I'm really eager to deep dive into the topics and really hear this group thought about these most pressing issues. So having said that, in the interest of everyone's time, I'd like to start by briefly introducing today's panelists. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Yoon Kwan, who's a professor emeritus in Seoul National University, and he's a former Korean Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade that time.
Long time ago.
Yeah, he's currently at Harvard Belfer Center as a senior visiting scholar, and also served as Korea's eminent representative to and co-chair of the East Asia Vision Group 2. Additionally, Dr. Yoon has written a lot, publishing several books, around 70 articles in the fields of international political economy, Korean foreign policy, and inter-Korean relations. And next we have Dean James Steinberg, who is incoming Dean of Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, SAIS, as well as former Deputy Secretary of State and former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Clinton. Dean Steinberg has held a series of other key roles in the government, including as Director of the State Department's Policy Planning Staff, and Deputy Assistant Secretary for Analysis in the Bureau of Intelligence and Research. And now we have Ambassador Bart Lippert joining us virtually. Ambassador Lippert is Senior Advisor and Korea Chair at CSIS, as well as former the United States Ambassador to the Republic of Korea. His awards and decoration include the Bronze Star Medal for his service in Iraq, the Defense Meritorious Service Medal, and Basic Parachutist, right? Badge. He's also the recipient of the Department of Defense Distinguished Public Service Award and Department of the Navy's Distinguished Public Service Award. And next we have Dr. Sang-Yeon Lee, who is the president of the Sejong Institute and president of the Korea Nuclear Policy Society. He was previously a policy advisor for Korean multiple ministries, so which include foreign affairs, national unification, national defense, and he has written a lot on matters such as international politics and security, Korea-US relations, inter-Korean relations, nuclear security and non-proliferation, and East Asian issues. And last but not least, of course, we have Bert, who is the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Korea and Japan. Previously, he served as a special envoy for North Korean affairs and director of the Office of Korean Affairs. And over his distinguished career, Das Lambert has served in Vietnam, Beijing, Thailand, Japan, and more. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And before we get started, I want to remind that this is open to the public and our audience to submit their questions via the Zoom Q&A function. And I'll try to draw on any relevant questions during the session. So I'd like to invite our speakers to deliver brief opening remarks, including Mark Lambert.
Thank you so much, Dr. Oh, and thank you to the Korea Foundation and to the Atlantic Council for this opportunity. I know you all had an opportunity to speak, to listen to Ken Moy speak from the State Department earlier today, and he sort of painted the broader picture of what our priorities are in East Asia. What I'd like to do is drill down a little bit more and look at the security challenges and relate those to how they reflect on the bilateral alliance between the Republic of Korea and the United States. I think a good way of doing this is dividing the challenges into three basic parts. The first part would be the traditional security challenge, and this, of course, is the bedrock of our alliance. For decades now, the United States and the Republic of Korea have been working together to ensure the physical safety of the Korean Peninsula. This is part and parcel of the United States' commitment to resolutely oppose all activities that undermine, destabilize, or threaten the international rules-based order. Washington will regularly affirm the need to maintain an inclusive, free, and open Indo-Pacific, and we will prioritize the importance of maintaining peace and stability, lawful, unimpeded commerce, and respect for international law, including the freedom of navigation and overflight in the South China Sea and beyond. I would like to make the point, too, that should be obvious. The United States will continue to remain in close consultation and coordination with our South Korean allies on issues of mutual concern, especially the DPRK situation. The second category of challenges that we faced is composed of the technology and information challenges that threaten our collective security. These include the disinformation campaigns that fuel distrust in democracies, as well as cyber attacks that target critical infrastructure and are used to steal intellectual property. International institutions, particularly those that set standards for emerging technologies, are under threat. Emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and 5G have great potential to advance innovation and bring many benefits, but we must work together to ensure they are developed and deployed in a responsible manner that respects our shared democratic values and human rights. We countries that cherish open societies and the free flow of information must work together to protect them. The final category includes emergent crises like climate change and COVID-19. These are urgent, transnational issues that affect all governments and peoples and that require a shared commitment to transparency and action. Higher temperatures, rising sea levels, increasingly extreme weather affect everything from military readiness to human migration patterns to food security. Upcoming in Glasgow, it's imperative that all countries, including those of us who are blessed to be so developed, set strong national standards that can serve as a model for others. In a similar fashion, we and the Republic of Korea need to work together to help other countries, particularly those less developed, to meet ambitious standards. This is a challenge that will require all of us to work together, including setting goals to reduce things like methane globally. As the COVID-19 pandemic has made abundantly clear, our health security is part and parcel of our efforts to promote and maintain regional security. This is an extremely promising new chapter in our bilateral alliance that hopefully over the course of time will help us not only to address the COVID-19 pandemic, but to be better prepared for the next time we face these transnational health threats. I'd like to take a quick digression and say a few words on the US-China relationship because that's of keen interest, of course. President Biden has made it clear that we do not seek conflict with Beijing. There will be areas in which we should and will compete, areas where we can cooperate, and areas where our relationship will be adversarial. As Vice President Harris said during her trip to Singapore, our engagement in Southeast Asia and the Indo-Pacific is not targeted against any one country, nor is it designed to make anyone choose between countries. Rather, our engagement is intended to advance the positive vision we have regarding our participation and partnership in the region. Our economic vision is a critical part of that. We strongly support and seek to defend the rules-based order that has enabled the Indo-Pacific's remarkable economic growth and will continue to allow it. So back to the three challenges that I laid out. The question for the United States is how we begin to address them. For the United States, we have made clear our commitment to our alliances and our partnerships, and no alliance is more important than ours with the Republic of Korea. We're also committed to our shared values that sustain our alliances, including the democratic values of free speech, a free press, transparency, and clean government. This requires reaffirming those values and the foundation of international relations we are striving to protect, a free and open, rules-based international order. We're also broadening our alliances and partnerships. That begins with improving military capabilities and readiness in a way that respects human rights, along with broadening our capacity to address threats in the economic, technological, and informational realms. We can't just be reactive in addressing security and environmental challenges. We must take a proactive approach. In every possible way, the Republic of Korea is a natural partner for the United States. As the world's 10th largest economy, having a flourishing democracy and a regional power, the Republic of Korea is poised to take an even greater leadership role on both regional and global issues. Korea and the United States are seen as reliable partners by the countries of the Indo-Pacific, and we're working together to synchronize both our U.S. Indo-Pacific strategies and Korea's new Southern policies. We're working together to combat COVID-19, the climate crisis, and a host of other issues. We're also working together with the Japanese trilaterally on many of these very same issues. We are and should be ambitious about the regional and global scope of our alliance. I look forward to talking more about our perspective on this during the panel discussion. But I want to reiterate the overriding importance of working closely together with a wide array of like-minded allies and partners, including in multilateral fora. We must build strong, resilient, and broad coalitions in order to achieve our shared vision of a free, open, inclusive, and healthy Indo-Pacific, unconstrained by coercion and anchored by democratic values. Thank you very much, Dr. Oh.
Thank you, Mark. And now I'd like to turn to Minister Yoon for your remarks.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, Dr. Oh. And it's my great pleasure and honor to participate in this conference. Actually, one of the most important and prudent decisions that President Biden and his team made since the beginning of his term this year, I think was their decision to shift the focus of Quad from military security-oriented organization to non-military security-oriented organization. And actually that decision changed global, political atmosphere in the Asia-Pacific region quite a lot. And also it made it easier for the Korean government to deepen its cooperation with the United States and making contribution to the stability and prosperity of Indo-Pacific. One of the important thing is whether there will be provider of international public goods in this region, Indo-Pacific. I thought that there was no major power or group of major powers which could provide international public goods in that region, Indo-Pacific. Of course, we have ASEAN, but their focus is rather narrow, focusing on Southeast Asia. So I think it was important for us to witness, the United States and three other members of the Quad are continuing to making progress in the field of vaccine cooperation or climate change and in some other areas. And I think the speed of progress is quite rapid. It is very positive sign, and I'm very much relieved to see that. And if they continue to make that kind of contribution in the future, I think probably billions of people will benefit from their achievements. And it will lead to boosting of the legitimacy of democracy or coalition of democratic countries in providing that kind of public goods. And that will be an important strategy, long-term, indirect, but more sophisticated way of confronting authoritarian regimes in the world. So I think my evaluation of the Quad is quite positive in that regard. In terms of the U.S. South Korea, ROK alliance, I'm also optimistic in the sense that the current state of bilateral cooperation is quite, good and intense, and both governments have been cooperating quite, smoothly in the recent year, especially. So my, evaluation is positive, and I hope both countries continue their cooperation in those fields. Cooperation in vaccine provision, also climate change and critical technologies, etc., etc. That's important, and in that regard, I am positive. But I'm a little less optimistic in terms of the North Korean nuclear issue, because this is the key issue which determines, political atmosphere surrounding Korean Peninsula. So I hope there would be closer cooperation, more active cooperation between the United States and South Korea in that regard. Otherwise, the situation will continue to be unstable there. That will make South Korean policymakers as well as public opinion leaders to look for China, for their possible contribution in stabilizing Korean Peninsula situation. So there are some room for both allies to further develop bilateral relationship. Let me stop there.
Thank you, Minister. And Dean Steinberg, floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. It's great to be here, and thanks to the Korea Foundation and the Atlantic Council for organizing this terrific session, and to my colleagues for terrific opening presentations. I think one of the things you've heard from everyone, and I'll reiterate, is that the hallmark of the early days of the Biden administration has been a reemphasis on relationships with partners and allies, and I think that's been enormously welcome, and no place more important than in this region because of the historical role that these have played and the tremendous contribution in terms of global public goods that stability creates. The engagement, the sense of the United States being there and being a reliable partner is critical, and it has been something from day one that we've heard from President Biden and everybody in the administration, and it's not just been rhetoric. It's been, we've seen this in the visits and the meetings and the activities really show a deep and genuine commitment to this. And so I think that's a tremendous framework in which to think about how to manage the challenges going forward. I think there are three particular challenges that relate both to the region and especially to the US-ROK relationship. The first is inevitably having to deal with the fallout from Afghanistan. I personally have no doubt that the decisions that President Biden and the administration made shouldn't be seen as reflecting on either the level of U.S. engagement in the world or its reliability as a partner. But I think it's inevitable that people will raise the question. And so it will be important going forward that both the uniqueness of the Afghan situation is explained and why that shouldn't cause anxiety about the United States' willingness to commit in a very real sense, not just political, but ultimately even militarily, to the security of this region. I know the administration has made an effort in this direction, but it's still a question in people's mind that needs to be addressed. The second one is one that Ambassador Lambert touched on, which is the question about, are we entering the phase of a new Cold War? Again, you heard from the ambassador that, and the administration again has been clear in its rhetoric from the president all down, that that's not the objective. That's not what, we're not seeking confrontation with China. We're not trying to draw new lines or, as the ambassador said, make countries choose sides. But inevitably, if you look at some of the activities that are taking place, it still raises questions about whether the rhetoric can be translated into reality. You look at the meetings of the Quad and the fact that, yes, they are focusing on issues other than China and military security, but nonetheless, this is a gathering of countries, all of which have issues and problems with China. You look at the new agreement between the UK and Australia and the United States. It is a military agreement. It's a security agreement. And what brings them together our concerns about China. And what we are not hearing in sort of complement these new arrangements and new relationships are arrangements and relationships that include China. I hate to go back to the past, but when President Obama took office and we made our first efforts to re-engage the United States in the Asia-Pacific region, we focused on not just reassuring and reestablishing the partnerships with key allies like Japan and Korea and Australia, but also some of the inclusive arrangements. The United States joined the East Asia Summit. We re-engaged at a higher level in the ASEAN Regional Forum. And so it was a balance between those things which included the like-minded countries, which shared our values and our security interests, with efforts to make clear that this was not an attempt to draw new Cold War-like lines. And so I think the challenge will be to take seriously what the President and best remember said, that this is not what the goal is, to be convincing in reality about this. And I think there are ways to this be done, but it is critical because, and this gets me to the kind of point about dealing with the relations with ROK, is that because there are good reasons why we don't want to ask countries to make choices and have to choose sides, that the countries of the region have significant economic and political interest with China, which they want to be able to continue while maintaining the reassurance about the US relationship. And so that's the third challenge, is how do we develop a kind of balanced relationship with our allies in the region who both are concerned about understandably concerned about some of the worrisome behavior of China, but also don't want to take sides. And how do we talk to each other in a balanced way about the relationship where we understand and accommodate in US policy the not always identical perspective of our partners in the region, and especially South Korea, which has such a great stake in not having to make those choices. So those are the three challenges. I'm pretty confident the administration is aware of it, but it's what's going to make this going forward successful, and the broader strategy of deepening the alliances, deepening the partnerships, not only in the traditional security measures, but the things that both Ambassador Lambert and the Minister talked about, which is on these new challenges where we really do need to work cooperatively.
Thank you. And Dr. Lee?
Well, thank you. Well, I appreciate Korea Foundation and Atlantic Council for organizing this wonderful conference. Well, I'm in line with previous speakers in evaluating current status of Korea-US alliance. Many people talked about May summit between Moon and Biden, and I would say that that joint statement clearly shows that a US-Korea alliance is evolving from security-focused alliance into a truly comprehensive strategic partnership. So having said that, perhaps the context in which this alliance is working may be changing very quickly. Obviously, we have COVID-19, this is a new factor. And also we see many systemic fragmentation, like many international regimes are not working properly. And sometimes we see failing global governance. Behind this, we see missing global leadership. Even though Biden has declared that America is back. Is America back? If you don't see, not yet. If you don't see many evidence about America is back. And at the same time, China is not ready to take over global leadership. And also we see worsening US-China strategic competition. I think this is a kind of a global, the defining factors for the current global security landscape. And it seems to me Biden administration is trying to cope with these challenges by promoting sort of a multilateral approach, by promoting enhancing partnership and network among allies and partners. So in Indo-Pacific, we see Quad, and United States wants to expand it to Quad Plus. And recently we saw the AUKUS, Australia, UK, US security partnership as a new mechanism. And other than that, we have many other similar groupings, like D10, 10 democracies, and T12, 12 like-minded countries with advanced technologies. So all these groupings is kind of a multilateralism that United States to try to promote. But it seems that also these are not general multilateralism, but it is kind of a mission-driven coalition or partnership. So United States is trying to cope with many challenges with this mechanism. So having said that, what South Korea should do? Perhaps South Korea should actively work with these groupings. But at the same time, there are some concerns on the part of South Korea. For example, if South Korea joins Quad, perhaps China will have some retaliation against it. Because China clearly claims that Quad is a kind of an anti-China military alliance. And including those issues, there are some concerns. For example, in South Korean case, when we deploy the THAAD system, China actually heavily retaliated against South Korea. So in the future, perhaps if South Korea, even though South Korea want to collaborate with this mechanism, perhaps the United States also should address those regional concerns on the part of Korea. And also, we have a continuing North Korean issue. Doctor, you already mentioned about North Korean continuing missile provocations. And even though South Korean government is trying to raise the issue about declaration to end the Korean War, but North Korea does not respond at all. And the current situation on the Korean Peninsula is a kind of complete impasse. US DPRK dialogue is completely shut down, and inter-Korean dialogue is also shut down. So we don't know how this situation will continue. One of the major structural problems for Moon Jae-in government is that its term is almost over. Sooner or later, Korean politics will get into the presidential election cycle. So, having said that, perhaps North Korea may be calculating that perhaps they will hit the deal with the next South Korean government. We don't know yet. So I think that's the kind of context that Korea-US alliance is working these days. Let me stop here.
Thank you. And now I'd like to ask Ambassador Lippert to share your remarks.
All right, and thanks, Dr. O. Thanks to all the panelists. And again, apologies for not being there in person. 2 young, unvaccinated school children at home, a spike in the upper Midwest of COVID, and hence I'm not traveling this week. So thanks for bearing with me. Second, it's also a little strange to see my living room on TV so blown up at the Atlantic Council, but I digress. The danger of going last is always that all of the very good comments have rightly covered the landscape, I think, exceptionally well. So what I thought I would do quickly is lift and shift and drill down a little bit into the US-ROK alliance in hopes of provoking a discussion along those lines. And, you know, obviously associate myself with many of the good remarks on the broader strategic landscape in the Asia Pacific as well. So let me just start and be relatively brief and say, first, I think it's fair to say that when President Trump was in office, there was a deviation from the bipartisan consensus that existed concerning the US-ROK alliance over the last couple of decades. We had an over-focus, I would argue, on not unimportant issues, but again, perhaps too many resources, too much attention on 3 specific issues. 1, burden sharing. 2, summits with North Korea. And 3, thorny trade issues, 232, 301, steel quotas, all of that. When President Biden came into office, as Deputy Secretary Steinberg emphasized, there was I would argue, a reset towards alliances, friends, and partners in the Pacific. I think this upside down pyramid of thorny issues around the alliance was right-sized or flipped back in an upright position. And as a result, the scope of the alliance has been expanded, or I would argue restored to where it was end of Bush 1 or end of Bush 2, the Obama administration, to a global and regional focus along the lines of more non-traditional issues, environment, technology that you heard Deputy Secretary Lambert alluded to, global health, energy. There's, again, a reset and a broadening of scope under President Biden. I would say the third point I'd make is that the security issue, which again consumed a lot of time in terms of troops and costs under President Trump, is back on track. I think you saw a quick resolution of the burden sharing agreement, access to the THAAD site. Those issues were dispensed with quickly, and a much more normalized, if you will, conversation is now underway with OPCON, access to training ranges, and the future of the combined exercise program. Third, where I think there was good initial alignment after the early Biden-Moon summit was on DPRK policy around a set of principles that included denuclearization of the peninsula, full implementation of UN Security Council sanctions, the appointment of a special envoy. I could go on, but you also saw that there was an affirmation of some of the initiatives that I think President Moon very much valued in terms of the Panmunjom Singapore summits, peace, peace on the peninsula, permanent lasting peace on the peninsula were also affirmed as well. So I think there was good initial touches on that issue, on an issue that quite frankly in early days could have gone sideways and did not. And finally, I think on the positive side of the ledger, and I don't want to spend too much time, but I also just have to get it in, is the people-to-people relationship remains amazingly strong. And I think that is a critical foundation in two democracies. And you saw it show up in the US Congress's work, I think rightly so, criticizing some of the, I guess, noises from the Trump administration about troop withdrawals and things of that nature. That people-to-people piece, I think, is robust, strong, and often underestimated. So I just wanted to flag that. Finally, I just wanted to get to, despite early progress, I think a lot of work needs to be done. And it doesn't detract from the early progress. And quite frankly, if everything was done in 9 months, they wouldn't need panels like this. And I would be also suspicious that everything was papered over, not effectively done in the true spirit of the alliance, which actually works through hard problems. First, I think there are real questions that I think Dr. Lee mentioned, and I think the foreign minister as well, about where do we go from here on DPRK policy. We seem to be at loggerheads. Do we incentives? Do we go for more sanctions or try to build leverage, or do we simply wait for the political environment, especially the COVID issue that seems to be really impacting the political environment in DPRK to subside? Second, the economic agenda. The U.S., I would argue, has not put forward a trade agenda in Asia right now. There are questions about where we're headed on that piece. I think this is something that the alliance can work on together. I know the Koreans are very interested in a digital services agreement. That's quite interesting. There's also a brief mention in the joint statement of work we could do at the WTO that leads into very real questions about non-market economies. And finally, I think there's also really interesting work on the supply chain issues and regulatory issues in Korea that could round this out going forward. Final 2 points, obviously it was alluded to a little bit earlier, but the trilateral relationship with Tokyo, I think, is an area where more work's to be done. And the very good treatment of the China issue that I think Deputy Secretary Steinberg already outlined in a very fulsome manner, and others have commented upon, is a final piece of homework between the two sides going forward. So with that, let me stop and just say thanks again, Dr. Oh, for having me. Thanks to the Atlantic Council, and thanks to the Korea Foundation.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing your analysis and insights. And I think we just have too many topics to cover. And the first question, I'd like to follow up on Minister Yoon's and Dr. Lee and your assessment in terms of whether what the Biden administration is trying to do, it's more focused on non-security elements or not, and because that is a question that I get a lot from my Asian stakeholders while I'm running the Asia Security Initiative on a daily basis. So taking one example, the Quad Summit joint statement, I think it's fair to say that although it has something about the denuclearization of North Korea, but it says how countries are working together on the issues of vaccine, science, technology, and climate change, etc., which is also aligned with the joint statement from the May US-ROK summit. But But as Dr. Lee mentioned, but at the same time, though, we see from AUKUS and new security, trilateral pact, and also what we have seen from Afghanistan. We would like to have more clarity about whether there's any pattern and how do you assess the ongoing U.S. effort in terms of growing this network of multilateral partnership in the Indo-Pacific and in terms of the security front. And do you see an emerging pattern in terms of the security-focused versus economic-focused partnership? And are there any particular lines of effort that are a good fit for expanding the framework to include additional like-minded countries, allies and partners like South Korea? And maybe perhaps one question is, what is the role of the U.S. domestic politics playing into this? So maybe, can I start with maybe Minister Yoon, please?
A lot of difficult and important issues there. And I think, you pointed out some interesting aspect of what's going on these days. There are some kind of military security-oriented international network like AUKUS and non-military security, centered organizations like Quad and some other economic institutions or something like that. I think, in political reality, I think it is difficult to differentiate those two things together. Always economics and politics intermingle. But from a short-term perspective, it may be probably reasonable and practicable to have, to pursue those two tracks at the same time, because countries like Japan has some unique, in a situation which is peace constitution, which makes Japan makes Japan difficult to take a more active security role in international relations. Probably that may be the reason why Prime Minister Abe has been trying so hard to revise their constitution. So let them, for the time being, focus on non-military security field in international relations. Also, South Korea, because of its unique and particular, geopolitical location, I think South Korea has some difficulties for them to take some active military regional role in East Asia. South Korea is adjacent to China, and also it has North Korea as its neighbor, which has, armed with nuclear weapons or something like that. So that's the reason why I commended President Biden's decision to shift the focus of Quad from military security oriented organization toward non-military security organization. So I think that made Korea easy to join international cooperation in that way. Another thing that I would like to mention is in the process of withdrawing U.S. troops from Afghanistan, and in the process of concluding AUKUS or something like that, there were some worrisome side effects which South Koreans might have noticed. For example, during the process of U.S. troop withdrawal from Afghanistan, there was somehow some kind of alienation of European alliance countries, And I mean, South Korean policymakers might have worried a little bit about that. Of course, they recognize that U.S. commitment to South Korea is qualitatively different from their commitment to Afghanistan. So, I mean, they are not much worried, but I mean, deep in their minds, I mean, they may be concerned about that. And the more important indirect impact of that on Korean security issue is probably Biden administration may be more reluctant to take a kind of proactive and bold initiative to search for a peaceful negotiated solution of North Korea's nuclear problem, because they may be worried about that kind of initiative may be regarded as a kind of weak, weakness of democratic government. As you know, I mean, the Republican parties has always criticized the Democratic Party for being weak in security matters or something like that. So there may be some kind of psychological repercussion of that on making U.S. policy toward North Korea or toward nuclear issue, which is very kind of critical in stabilizing Korean Peninsula situation.
Thank you. Des Lambert.
Wow, that's a lot to address. So first of all, I would start with another emphasis on the Biden administration's commitment to multilateralism. We are doing this in new ways and in old ways. We're emphasizing the alliances. We're emphasizing trilateral mechanisms. We're emphasizing quadrilateral mechanisms. We're emphasizing ASEAN central institutions, and we're open to other ideas. Turning to Deputy Secretary Steinberg's comments about China and the need to engage with China, I agree. And I think our actions are speaking. We don't have the results yet. So yeah, I think it is significant that your successor, Deputy Secretary Sherman, did go to Tianjin, did have meetings with the Chinese. She was followed by former Secretary Kerry to talk with the Chinese about global climate change. That certainly is an issue that if we're going to tackle climate change together, we've got to work with the Chinese and find a way. Similarly, trying to work with China on an effective response to COVID. We've got to deal with them. We've got some other issues on transnational crime and other things to build upon. But we have to keep plugging away at this, and we have to hope that men and women of goodwill in Beijing will meet with us to do that. You talk about a relationship as complex as our relationship with China, and there is a tendency as a practitioner to just get lost in the details. There are, I kid you not, at least 5,000 aspects to our bilateral relationship. So there's a real need to focus on what we're starting to call North Star issues. What are those 5 or 6 things that are so important in our bilateral relationship that we just can't keep our eyes off of them, no matter if we're dealing with a crisis of the day or some catastrophe or other things? We have to, as an alliance, be focused on these. And I would argue this is a work in progress, but obviously traditional security issues has to be part of that. You mentioned the withdrawal from Afghanistan. I think it is significant that we worked very closely with our Korean allies on that withdrawal, of also getting our own people out and the Afghans who had worked with us, but working with Korea quite closely to get those Afghanis who had been working with KOICA or with your embassy. I think that's a testament to the global nature of what we're doing. Economic security is something that we're looking at in a new way. Most of my career, there were these artificial barriers that would separate traditional security issues from economic security issues, and we have to tear those down. I think it's significant that we're talking about things like a digital economy and the rules that will govern how commerce takes place in the future. We're talking about supply chain resiliency. I mean, our two countries are greatly involved in issues like next generation batteries. You know, I think it's hugely important that a Korean firm and an American firm last night announced the largest deal that Ford Motor Company has ever had. In a similar fashion, how can we work to ensure that Korean chip manufacturers, American chip manufacturers, perhaps those from Japan or Taiwan, can work together to make sure they have the access to raw materials that they need. That's vitally important to our security, but also to our prosperity. Working on standards, I mentioned this before, but there is a debate going on that will culminate in the next few years that will determine how our grandchildren deal with artificial intelligence, deal with the free flow of ideas. And making it simple, there's a more authoritarian view and there's a more open view. We need to work together to support that more open view. I'd like to make a pitch here on the global nature of our alliance, and something that there's a tendency, a lot of us who worked on Korea for a while, you focus on what worked 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I remember, and Ambassador Lippert was ambassador in Seoul, when Korea dispatched healthcare volunteers and experts to Africa to combat Ebola. I think that was a watershed moment, and I think Korea has capacities to do similar things, working with us, working with Europeans and others as we move forward. It was significant that when Deputy Secretary Sherman was last in Seoul, Korea announced a huge investment in capacity building and infrastructure projects in the Northern Triangle area of Central America. I mean, that's groundbreaking. But something that I feel particularly promising is Korea's unique story of transforming itself from a single-party state into a multi-party liberal democracy. The way that you've evolved to respect freedom of expression and freedom of speech, and you're not perfect, nor are we. But I think that is a template that would benefit other countries. As we're looking to do capacity building and helping to train young people in Southeast Asia and Africa, that's what we need to be doing. And I think that should be one of those North Star issues. How can we work in ASEAN and elsewhere to do that? Let me caveat on North Korea. I'm no longer in the North Korea game. Thank goodness Ambassador Sung Kim is the leader, and my good friend Jung Pak is working here.
My next question is about North Korea.
Yeah, but we are engaged. I mean, it's significant that just last week I was in New York when Secretary of State Blinken met with Foreign Minister Chung, and we talked about the North Korean issue and how we can best go forward. Sung Kim was just meeting with Korea's National Security Advisor to talk about North Korea. How should we best address this? And believe me, last night, our time in Washington, after the most recent short-range ballistic missile test, there was conversation between the two. We need that conversation. We need that relationship in order to come up with a wise policy to address North Korea. Believe me, I know from experience, this is not an easy question to address, but it starts with having a relationship of trust and reliable communications with each other. I've talked too long.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to turn to Ambassador Lippert and Dr. Lee and Dean Steinberg. So Ambassador Lippert, would you like to share your assessment?
Sure. I don't know where to start grabbing. I guess what I would say is to the question of your initial question about multilateral institutions and U.S. domestic politics. Let me focus on that quickly and just say, I think the issue for us and I think the Koreans is the economic architecture. I think that's, to me, the most paramount issue, in that if you talk to the likes of Wendy Cutler and others who really follow the trade issues closely, it's that we in the United States just don't seem to have formulated what our multilateral economic agenda will be, especially in terms of trade agreements in the Asia Pacific. And it's not that we expect that you should expect a new administration to come in the first 6 months and have it all sorted out. It takes time, no doubt about it. But in this case, time is not necessarily on our side. We've seen a lot of action around the follow-on agreement to TPP, with the Chinese now wanting to come in and the Taiwans wanting to come in, the Koreans undertaking a lot of consultations to try to perhaps submit their package as well. I mean, and the U.S. just isn't as present, at least in this part. And I think that's an important part of the equation. The domestic politics do play into this, right? Especially labor and environment issues. And I think here, if you quote Bill Reinsch over at CSIS, you do see that there is a possible template in terms of the NAFTA renegotiation, right? What's now called USMCA. Labor did come to the table, at least according to Bill. There is an interesting, perhaps, model there that we could follow. But I do think that, you know, when we talk about these multilateral organizations, we talk about the diplomatic collections and communities. I come back to how central trade is. And it dovetails with what Das Lambert said about, you know, the barriers between trade and national security are really, I think, eroding rapidly. And I think that's a piece where the alliance has work to do. Just a couple other quick points on smaller issues. I would say I do agree the alliance is much broader in terms of where it was just a few short years ago. I think the point about the deployment to West Africa and Ebola, I just wanted to make the broader point here is that the Koreans, which was completely lost in the joint statement in the summit, did make another sizable contribution to the global health security agenda, following on a robust one, and I believe it was 2015, 2016. And I just think this global health issue, as I am experiencing right now, sitting in my living room instead of being there in person, is something that could have a profound impact on security defined writ large. Final, I think the point in terms of commenting, and I know you're going to get to North Korea next. I think Das Lambert's right. I think we're talking. I think there's good alignment. I think the real question centers around next steps, right? It's a hard problem, but I do think that, you know, when the North Koreans, I think, try to figure out where they are after they deal with COVID, because they basically self-sanctioned themselves. They've shown very little interest in coming out of that, other than a few statements here and there. There's going to be real questions about what you do to generate sufficient leverage or sufficient incentives to come back to the table and get into a credible process in terms of negotiations and denuclearization. Let me just stop there.
Thank you, Ambassador. Dr. Lee?
Well, I think one of the important lessons of COVID-19 is that our national security can be threatened by not just by traditional security issue, but by a bunch of other issues as well. We have never thought that COVID-19 is a security issue, but suddenly COVID-19, rule-based international order, technology, climate change, even cyberspace, all these are viewed as a kind of security issue as well. So reading the Quad Summit statement and ROK-US Summit joint statement, the language clearly carries these connotations. So they accept the North Korean issue. Those statements clearly contains the many transnational or multilateral issues. So that's why in the Pacific as well, perhaps multilateralism will play a very important part in our joint management of the issues. So having said that, also, but we never ignore the traditional securities as well, particularly after we already mentioned some of the fallout from U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. It was shocking in two ways because first it was very chaotic. And also, it was shocking to see how quickly a normal government can collapse. So having seen that process in Korean case, two kind of a reaction emerges. Liberals argue that U.S. may not be a reliable alliance partner, so South Korea should quickly get outcome and prepare for self-defense. Conservatives may argue like this. Alliance has become even more important. And so South Korea should follow anything that the United States demands on South Korea. I think there's two kind of extreme views. But simply speaking, South Korea is not Afghanistan. And comparing two nations is kind of self-humiliating, I think. So what we need to focus is that how can we jointly strengthen its capabilities. So of course, South Korea should invest in enhancing our own capabilities, but at the same time, you should focus on maintaining the healthy status of the alliance. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Dean Steinberg, thank you for your patience.
I'll be brief. I loved Ambassador Lippert's image of the pyramid being righted with the important wide base on the bottom. And I think the one thing that I think could be further strengthened that, I mean, we have a great list of issues that we cooperate on, and especially the non-traditional issues that all of us have been talking about today. But underlying at the really bottom of the base is a deeper strategic dialogue. And the need to sort of talk about these big issues and to really think about, I mean, we all talk about the future world order and all those things, but there's a reality to this. And what are our conceptions of what we want the region and the world to look like? Ambassador Lippert talked about trade. That's critically important. What do we think the future of this trading system is? How much are we going to be autarkic? How much are we prepared to be interdependent? Those kinds of conversations. And frankly, in my own experience, it's the one thing that has been lacking in the US-South Korean dialogues. We don't have those deep strategic discussions. We have great discussions on all these issues. We have a lot of alignment on each one of these. But getting that deeper fundamental discussion, we may agree, may disagree, but having that conversation itself is a sign of having a deep strategic partnership. And I think that would really put that pyramid space on even a stronger bottom.
Thank you. So the next question on North Korea. So, just this month's missile test, including last night. So really underscoring that addressing the North Korea challenge remains a key priority for the alliance and for the region, security and prosperity and stability. So Dr. Lee mentioned quickly about President Moon's speech at UNGA in terms of the ending the declaration of the war. So I'd like to hear from others what would be your assessment in terms of his speech and also reaction from North Korea briefly. And perhaps one of the most important questions here, what is the role of China here? And to me, so both the United States and ROK have same expectation in terms of the desirable role of China. And I think that is probably the key to really resolve this important challenge. So I'd like to hear from Minister Yoon.
Yes, all those are very important questions, and I fully agree with Dr. Steinberg's observation that both the United States and ROK needs deeper level strategic dialogue. From that aspect, I'd like to raise my concern about the future of North Korea policy between two allies. I think there should be deeper, dialogue at the top level between two allies on where we should go in terms of dealing with, for example, North Korea nuclear issue. My observation is that from a long-term perspective, since the end of Cold War, in the last 3 decades, traditional American approach, which was based on 3 assumptions. One, first, China will cooperate in denuclearizing North Korea. Second, kind of moralistic coercive approach, defining North Korea as a kind of evil, rogue state. Third, America's narrow focus on military and nuclear issue without paying much attention to other dimensions of U.S.-North Korea relationship, like economic, diplomatic, some other political issues or something like that. And a traditional U.S. approach based on these 3 assumptions actually did not succeed in denuclearizing North Korea. 3 decades ago, North Korea was a non-nuclear state. Now it has about 30 to 60 nuclear warheads. So I think we need a kind of out-of-the-box thinking, especially inside the United States, for U.S. strategic interest. Because as the result of that kind of traditional American approach, U.S. influence in the region surrounding Korean Peninsula has been gradually receding or weakening. Let me explain this way. As the result of current impasse, I think China has been, has been enjoying the status quo, like current impasse, and its influence has been rising gradually in the recent decades. North Korea was being pushed into the orbit of China, so it continues to exercise its influence over North Korea. As long as Chinese influence over North Korea is strong, South Korean political leaders cannot but pay much attention to what China would do in dealing with North Korea. In other words, China's influence over North Korea will, spill over into South Korea. Not just Progressive Party leaders, but also Conservative Party leaders like former President Park Geun-hye tried hard to have a good relationship with Chinese leader because of her expectation that China will be able to help stabilizing inter-Korean situation and denuclearizing North Korea. So, as long as current impasse goes on, I think, Chinese influence continue to be there on the Korean Peninsula as a whole, or even getting stronger. That's what I'm worried from a long-term perspective. So I think from a strategic interest of the U.S. point of view, I think it needs to take a kind of bold approach, probably trying to engage, North Korea, changing the nature of the U.S.-North Korea relations, and that will probably begin to provide some room for successful denuclearization through negotiation. I think President Clinton's approach supports my argument in the sense that in the past 3 decades, only Clinton's administration could hold up nuclearization at least for several years. During the other administration, North Korea continued to rapidly increase their nuclear stockpile. So I think changing the nature of U.S.-North Korea relationship fundamentally in that regard will be probably the most important starting point to solve all these problems. Probably, why not make North Korea the second Vietnam? The United States opened their relationship with Vietnam, which used to be their enemy, and in the mid-1990s. And if they did not decide, to engage Vietnam at that time period, the American influence in that region might have been much reduced, I think. So I think we need to be bold in thinking about North Korea, I think.
Thank you so much. We have about roughly 10 minutes, so I would appreciate if speakers keep your comment brief. So, Des Lambert, would you like to answer my question on North Korea?
Well, keeping it brief, and again, with the caveat that Sung Kim does North Korea, I don't. I think there is a misperception out there that we're not willing to talk to the DPRK and that there are strings attached to our commitment. And that's just not the case. We've made it very clear at all levels that we will go anywhere, anytime, no preconditions to talk with the North Koreans. They have not responded to date, and as Ambassador Lippert alluded, that could be because of COVID, it could be other things, we just don't know. As for the role of China, I think, in 2017 when the North Koreans were sending off ICBMs and conducting nuclear tests, The Chinese were very focused on this issue. Subsequently, when the tensions were reduced, the Chinese were less focused on the issue. China has more influence over North Korea than any other country has, and I think it would be very helpful if the Chinese would engage with us on a helpful policy towards North Korea. Finally, I agree exactly with what was said about the need to talk about more than just denuclearization. Now, we've made it very clear that we are still abiding by the Singapore Declaration and the Panmunjom Declaration. I think that speaks for itself about the comprehensive way we're looking at it.
Thank you. Dean Steinberg.
So I have to say thank you for the comments about the Clinton administration in Korea. We don't often get people thinking about that period positively, and I think it was an important lesson about how to think about moving forward in the future. You know, in some ways it seems counterintuitive, but the problem is very straightforward, which is everybody hates the status quo, except they hate all the alternatives worse, right? And so the reality is that for both sides, less so for South Korea, but certainly for both North Korea and the United States, we don't like where we are. There are dangers and risks where we are. But both sides believe that the concessions that needed to be made to change the status quo are worse than the status quo. So unless we have a different diagnosis, it is going to be hard to move this. And that's why the North Koreans keep provoking, because they're trying to make us feel like the status quo can't be lived with and therefore we should do something. But that's the fundamental reality here, is that unless we believe that the compromises that would lead to a change would lead us to a better position than we are now, we're not going to make progress. On China, you know, I mean, I think the problem is, fine, it's easy to say that China should be more helpful, but they have a completely different view about what it would mean to be helpful to solve this problem. We know what they think, which is they think we should be willing to make unilateral concessions to North Korea to improve the political relationship, and that will induce it. So we can talk all we want about them wanting to help, but if we have a different view about how to move this forward, it's going to be difficult, even if we accept, as I do, that actually China would like to see progress on this issue. There's nothing in it for China to have a nuclear North Korea. But they just don't believe that the strategies that we think should be pursued are the right ones, and we don't believe that the strategies that they think should be pursued. And so that, you know, divergence makes it very difficult for the two of us to cooperate. And Russia too, by the way, which tends to look at it the way China does. And so I think the problem is less, is China willing to help, not willing to help, so much as we don't have a shared view. And it may be difficult for us to have a shared view about what it would take to make progress on this issue.
Thank you. Dr. Lee and Ambassador Lippert.
Well, as I mentioned, current situation is the complete impasse on the Korean Peninsula. But nevertheless, North Korea continues its nuclear activities at Yongbyon nuclear complex. A few days ago, IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi said that North Korea's nuclear program goes full steam ahead with work on plutonium separation and uranium enrichment. So having said that, perhaps North Korea will continue their activities in Yongbyon and other places. Then, as I mentioned, Moon Jae-in government is trying to induce North Korea into the negotiation table as a kind of with a gift. That's the declaration to end the Korean War. But I don't think North Korea will respond with that. And China's role, think it from Xi Jinping's political schedule. What is more important for China? Perhaps successful Beijing Winter Olympic next year, and later next year a party congress. Xi Jinping, it is quite important whether or not he will be re-elected for third term. I think that's quite important agenda. And what about the United States? Midterm election is coming. Then Biden will not have enough attention to give to North Korean nuclear issue as well. So having said that, it's not look very optimistic. So, but nevertheless, we should try in a more creative way to induce North Korea into the table.
Thank you. Ambassador Lippert.
Just really briefly to fill in some areas that perhaps weren't covered, and at the risk of being a little bit random. First, just a quick response to say I just have always disagreed with the notion that this is somehow an issue that lacks attention. When the dump truck of declassified documents under successive administrations finally shows up at the archives, I think there will be proof positive that The highest levels of government across Democrats and Republican administrations paid a lot of attention to it. It's just a very, very hard problem, as I think in very simple terms, Deputy Secretary Steinberg outlined. Second is I completely agree with Das Lambert. The problem isn't that we're not willing to talk with them. We've made that clear. That's an ongoing myth that is sort of pushed around. And I think it's not an issue of willing to talk. It's not an issue of lack of attention. It's, again, a hard problem. Couple of things to that hard problem. I think that at the risk of repeating myself, it's the leverage and incentives are critical here. And the question to me has always been, can you generate a sufficient amount of either in a sustainable way that is not compromising on either side? And to use the Clinton administration example, you had, again, Kim Jong-un's father was a different type of negotiator. He was under different pressures in terms of famine and potential use of force, and the package of incentives that was put together by the Clinton administration was amenable to many in the United States. Obviously, it ran into political opposition in the early Bush administration, but I think that is a critical piece of it. Final 2 points quickly is on China and Kim Jong-un. I think one of the ironies about the symmetry between Kim Jong-un and President Trump is that it allowed Kim Jong-un to basically engage the Chinese much more on his terms. You saw prior to that, Kim Jong-un have the frostiest relationship with Beijing in decades, and the ability to access the American president, I think, put the Chinese in a position where they essentially had to bracket Kim Jong-un with leader level meetings on his summits. And I think that allowed the North Koreans to actually gain some more leverage over the Chinese in a way that I'm not sure that was overly helpful in generating the type of incentive and leverage that would have led to perhaps a better shot at more traction in the negotiations. And last point, just a wild card going forward. I mentioned it already. It's COVID. The North Koreans, have crushed their own economy, closed themselves off from the world, and their coping mechanisms in terms of their informal markets, again, have largely been evaporated. So I think this is an interesting question, an interesting issue from the standpoint. It's something we haven't really seen in the context of these negotiations. Will it alter the aforementioned incentive structure that I outlined previously? And I'll stop there.
Thank you so much, everyone. Again, our distinguished speaker, not just for this session, but the session that we had earlier. And also, thank you for joining the audience, joining online. So I would like to just briefly say that I think I have a great homework on how to incorporate the idea of deeper strategic dialogue into what I do in terms of just running the Asia Security Initiative program here, and on the issues that we just talked about, all the pressing issues. And I agree with Ambassador Lipper clearly and fully that we're just living in a different era. So this is the work that we're just keeping our effort on how to expand and strengthening the alliance, the scope of the US-ROK alliance. So please stay tuned, and thank you again, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.